Hello and welcome to Identarati Office Hours, episode 32, No Things in IGA. Our guest today is Andre Cote from Sonic Bee and Sentil from Salesforce. And there's some great resources that Andre has provided on the wiki. And I'm going to start with a more existential conversation about this and question the words. So, in the title we use thing, but I've also seen non-human identity or machine identity used. Most of the time that means a piece of software. Why can't we call this software identity?
Well, some is not software. Some things are really devices, sensors, whatever. There may be some software in it, but at least these are components that you need to manage somehow, give access and manage. So not sure if it should be software components, software identities. Maybe.
But
And
most of the time we're talking about like a system that needs to update something in the CRM, or give me more of the use case here. Is this now obviously a machine pretending to be a human is a terrible idea, and giving an account. Is this just a hack because for legacy systems that just expect a username and password?
Well, I'd say there are different levels of access that you need, different level of identities. If you're looking at, for instance, those kind of services, well, think about the old make macros in Word and Word Perfect, and these were just things or processes that perform some task automatically, and it would be in your session with using your account, your authorizations. And if we, I would say, transpose it to these times, we don't use macros anymore. We use RPAs. It's in essence still the same, still macro-like features. But
RPA
I want,
being robotic process automation.
yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, sorry for
Yeah.
that. Yeah, the robot processing automation tools, maybe software components or batch jobs, whatever. The big difference between old macros and RPAs is a macro would use your session in your identity, so you would be doing it, and the macro would automate your tasks. In RPAs, there's an RPA identity and robots somewhere on the network performing your task for you, but not using your account, I hope, because robot doesn't need to do all the things that you can do. It's only is meant to do one or two things. It's got a very purpose-like being, and please don't give your RPA your authorizations. That's still happening, by the way. We saw some customers where they decided in the policy, access policy, that an RPA should have the authorizations of the user it is replacing. That's a bad idea. So it's different, but it's the idea, Mike.
just
So,
want to
Sentil, not to dive in the middle, but what's your perspective from Salesforce on machine identity or this machine access control?
sure. Before Salesforce, I was doing a lot of consulting, and I want to talk about the point you made about the software identity, right? The comment about that involving, like, for example, I worked for a bigger, famous cruise company, and that identity project involved the actual hardware of your RFID and tags for presented to humans once they enter the cruise line. So in that case, I would say it's more of a hardware identity as well, not just a software identity. Yeah, just want to add the point
Hmm.
there. Yeah.
Okay, so and I'm sorry, I was so excited to get into the episode, I dove right into the questions and I forgot to do the introductions. So maybe we can start over. We now know the topic. Well, at least we know why the title is No Things in IGA. Maybe we could roll back a second. And Andre, could you just give us a quick background on how you got here?
Yeah, how I got here is I'm kind of old, so meaning that when I came from school, there was no IT or hardly any IT or some mainframes that nobody could use. So I started my career as a financial accountant, doing financial accountancy. And looking back at those times, you could say that in that time I did financial accounting, which is fighting fraud at the tax department. I worked for the tax ministry, so I was fighting fraud, and you could say fraud is about abuse of authorization. So ever since my school days, I've been working in authorization management. So you could, and from the auditing part, got to security, and in 1998, I did my first identity and access related project called Enterprise User Management, where we tried to, for the tax department, tried to lower the idle time from the joiner process from 8 weeks to 1 week without IT. So just doing the business process development. And since then, I've been specializing in identity and access management. But from a business perspective, my background is, as I said, financial accounting. So I'm trying to do identity access management and mostly access control from a business perspective. I don't care about tools. I don't care about vendors or whatever. I like to think about access. Why should someone have access to whatever? And most in more specific in these days, if you want to have access, please explain why you should be allowed to have access, which is the new way of looking at of access control. So, from an auditing perspective to a consultancy perspective, I'm working for Sonic B, which is partly my own company, working in the Netherlands, and from that perspective, also working in different think tanks like ID Pro. I'm in the body knowledge committee of ID Pro, writing articles, reviewing articles. So, try to contribute to the profession as well.
Senthil, could you give us a quick introduction? How do you find yourself on Identerati office hours?
Sure. I started way back post my school. I started working as a .NET developer, and without me knowing, I was doing a lot of group-based authorization in AD. And that is something one of the interviewer noticed, and he was like, "Okay, we are starting something called digital identity. Would you be interested in joining the team? We don't have a job as a .NET developer, but something in a different way." I thought maybe back in 2007, digital identity was a cool space or something more of an unknown where you have CA integrity and few other products that was like back in 2000s, right? So I jumped into that and took on few opportunities to do a lot of hands-on integration and then architecture, and then got into more security engineering and products work, and moved into consulting with EY, and then later on to Okta and Salesforce now. I'm also leading the IoT working group for Cloud Security Alliance and part of ID Pro member. Just recently started with ID Pro, but looking forward to contributing there. Yeah.
Um, okay, well, no wonder you had a more expansive definition of the of what a thing is to include machines. Can I actually? I'm going to share a diagram here, and okay, I'm really bad at this, but let's just try it. So this diagram was given by or Nat Sakamura from the chairman of the or the vice chairman of the OpenID Foundation, was talking about the financial API in OpenID Connect. And he put up this diagram about the different ways that an OpenID Connect client might authenticate. And he sort of rated them. So, are we sending the secret as in the clear? Are we not sending the secret? And are we using asynchronous keys? And sort of the conclusion here is that, it'd be better if the server doesn't have the keys and the secret is never sent in the message, right? So where I'm going with this is that I wonder, and Andre, I'm going to put you on the hot spot here. Why aren't we just thinking of these these things, whether they're hardware or software, like OAuth clients?
Well, I'm at a disadvantage here because I'm not a developer. I don't have any idea about the inner workings of OAuth or OpenID Connect, so I have to make a guess here. But my guess is that I don't care about technology. I want to discuss about how do you get access to data and why should you have access to data, and mostly who is responsible for defining the policies, like signed or not signed. Someone is accountable for defining that policy that you should use a key or a token that's been well, how would you say it, provided by some other authority. And so, from my perspective, the business perspective, it's mostly about who is accountable for defining those access rules. Who is accountable? The person responsible, accountable for making the decision and defining the requirements. Because at this moment, uh, in most cases we're working for, we see that mostly IAM technology people, IAM experts, IT experts are defining these policies without thinking about why do we need this signed or not signed question mark or check mark. So, and whether it's OAuth, I really like the concept of OAuth because it's an intermediate process. There's some authority getting access on behalf of someone else. That's what I like because that means that there's a thing, a non-human being getting access, and we just have to make sure that we can find who's the human being behind the question. So the human being behind the request, the access request, and I want that to be secure. I want to have an audit trail to find out there's a transaction. Who was the person responsible for making the transaction? Who is responsible for making the policy to give access to the resource? So it's a more like a business-like requirement, and I like that we can use OAuth to help us in that. But if you would like to use another technology, be my friend. I don't care a lot, but I like the concept of OAuth and openly connect the federation. I'm a federation type of person, so let me say that up front. So I like the concept of using this kind of technology to make it scalable, make it more explicit. For instance, uh, using this I like the NIST 800 207, the baseline for zero trust, the zero trust standard that NIST published a few years back, and that makes it explicit where you can use what types of technologies. And I like so it's a very clear document. It's written from a business perspective. That's interesting, and it shows us that we can move ahead by moving from platform to protocol. And so this is where this question that you asked, Mike, comes from. If we can get all policies out of the systems, out of the platforms, and we can make them reusable, that makes it scalable and sustainable.
I just made a note about NIST 207 to add that to the. Did I get the number right? Did you say 207?
SP 800 207.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Please
Since you know,
remember it always.
maybe I'm crazy because yes, I'm deeply into OAuth. That's what I think about all day. But do you think that well, first of all, that we're moving to asynchronous secrets for machine authentication? Because I think that's an important distinction that Nat brought up. And then B, do you think something like OAuth, whether it's OAuth or something else, provides that framework, OAuth or maybe FIDO provides that framework for machine identity? Like, why are we, I guess, yeah, anyway, let me let you take that.
Sure. For me, when it comes to auth, it's all about the scopes. And when I look from identity security standpoint, how we can revoke once you give a token to a certain device or a client, I would say, that's where your continuous access evaluations come in and the back channel to go back and revoke a certain token that was created and provided to a certain client.
Huh.
For me, that ITDR concept and continuous access evaluation is important. OAuth has been around for a long time and helping a lot of the clients in providing granular scopes as needed, which is great. But I would like to latch on to the point of like providing more identity security by base of providing revocation to those token as needed. In the case of breach or access, okay, I can, you know, move off from that app today, but still my token is, if you're not setting the right amount of time, it'll still live for some time.
Yeah. So, Andre, in one of the homework pieces you assigned about privileged access management, you mentioned that. Let me get the wording right. Just-in-time provisioning for access is one of the best practices. So it sounds like what Senthil is suggesting sort of aligns with this idea that you were introducing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you could say that, and it is mostly because the document, Introduction to Privileged Access Management, is published by the ID Pro in the Body of Knowledge, and it's an interesting document because there's a lot of talk about PAM. It's every year looks to be the year of PAM. Now this year is the year of PAM. So again, and the concept of PAM is just it's a way of thinking about access. And behind that are some basic principles of access, like the principle of least privilege. What is it? Well, you can say it in wording. It's the maximum number of authorizations you need at the minimum level. So, or the minimum, yeah. That's so. And the other one is no one should have more authorizations all the time than only needed for the job. So if you want to be admin or root or whatever system you need it, well, you need it only for the time that you need it. You can only should only have it for the time you need it. And if you can have it just in time, you can ask to promote your identity or the authorizations at this moment to perform a task. And you have to demote it again, of course. That's only during the time that you need it. Then that's just a basic security hygiene task, you could say. No one needs authorizations unless they need them. No one should have authorizations unless they need them. So just in time means you get authorization at the moment you need it, only if you definitely need it, and you can explain why you need it. So there must be some legitimation for using the authorizations. And PAM systems can help automate that. It can be like a privileged identity management for PIM in Enter ID, but also be a PAM solution that also gives you authorizations just at the time that you need it. So in fact, you could say what Sindel mentioned, it's just in time is a core security principle, hygiene factor that we need to implement everywhere. That seems to be forgotten of a lot of the times. So if we just have it, the authorizations at the moment you need it, like for instance the OAuth access tokens, whatever, you don't get access unless it's allowed at that time and not longer, not after, not before that. So um, giving you the right sized level of authorizations.
Sentil, if I could queue up a question for you on, do applications need to know about this new security framework? Like in the past, at authentication time, they're given roles. Um, should we change how we give the credentials, or should we change how the applications work to maybe, better evaluate policies?
I would say more in line with the evaluating the policies. Application doesn't need to care about that due to the fact that, for example, if I work with an app owner, he or she should be aware of the policy we are implementing so that they don't come back to and say, hey, the application, the users are getting logged out every 5 minutes. Or, those are all the things that need to be communicated on a back channel through a policy document stating this is the new thing we are implementing. These are all the new session times. These are the new standing privileges or just-in-time privileges, I call it, right? So those are the things that need to be documented and shared in alignment with your GRC partners, because those are the people, especially for the publicly traded companies, they always look into your policy and controls and see whether you're adhering to that or not. That will definitely help your calls to your support teams, stating, hey, all my sessions are getting timed out after certain minutes. So if the application owner notifies the app users in advance about this new session times and everything, they should be okay with, okay, as long as after 1 hour, you'll be automatically timed out. These are all the things that can be communicated in advance through a policy and that can be implemented by the application owner for the app end users, I would say.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I mean, Salesforce has a world-class IT organization to manage this. But Andre, what about other companies that maybe don't have the resources of a Salesforce? Do you see one of the other things you talked about was on the governance side, basically reviewing, how did you say, make access request management and approval workflows. So basically strong governance policies. Um, do you see companies thinking about these centralizing policy management like that? And I know you don't like to talk about vendors or tools, but there's like 20 authorization vendors out there. And I'm wondering if you have seen any of these in the enterprise, maybe what tools are they looking at or even using in real life?
Oh, we've seen it happening. It's slowly getting ahead. The new policy-based access control solutions like Axiomatics and Plain ID and OPA. And there are some more. We even found an old tool, one of the customers using IBM ODM, which is not a policy engine, but you can use it as a decision engine. So it's starting getting used. Now we have to get the word out. But even without, like Salesforce is a big company, and they got a lot of resources. But if you don't have the resources, you can still do a lot of governance without expensive investments. So you can do your governance doesn't mean implementing tools. Governance means taking responsibility, and that means that that means that if C-level doesn't understand how to implement security or doesn't understand risk management, they will never be in control. So if the CEO has no clue, please leave that company because you'll be in a, well, you'll be victimized anyway. So there are some other ways you can try to do something like governance by having a business process, having a process, defining who's accountable or responsible in this process, and implement the governance structures that way. So it doesn't mean investing heavily; it does mean thinking heavily, and that can be done without a lot of cost as long as you're sensible. Yeah, you got
So
some interesting designs here.
I wanted to show this diagram. It's actually also from your, I think it's an ID Pro article
It
um,
is.
about PAM. And you mentioned in that article that there's sort of a different mentality when you're talking about managing access for a person and for a, I say machine here, but machine thing, non-person entity. Um, and but maybe if you as we think through some of these, look, or Andre, maybe you could give me your thoughts on why it's important to have this different business process, and do you see this happening in the wild also?
Yes. These are, well, as I said in the invitation, several no things in IGA. IGA, Identity Governance Administration tools like SailPoint Savings, Omada, One Identity, and plenty of those. Those cater for managing identities, accounts, and authorizations for persons, people, humans. And the underlying authorization mechanism would be role-based access control. So someone would join the company, get a birthright authorization like a company role or a business unit role or a team role. And when moving within the company or leaving the company, the IGA solution will then add, change, or revoke the authorizations and the accounts. So that's the top level, top picture. It's regular IGA, we could say. And within join and move and lever, we have the role-based access control for effective authorizations. If we're looking at where these identities come from, join or move or leave, the managing process behind it would be the HR or the hiring process. Hiring, firing, the HR, the human resource management process, takes care of the people, the persons joining the company. There's a legal construction between the person and the company, the organization. So there's a legal contract, um, be it an internal or external person contract, doesn't matter. There's a contract between the company and the organization, and based on that contract, you get an account and authorizations, or perhaps a car with driver if that's your role. So that would be, you can do that automatically mostly. If you're looking at things or non-human accounts, by the way, this bottom picture comes from the digital identity lifecycle white paper from or article from ID Pro, which is also covered in my PAM article, and is also mentioned in the non-human account management article. There's some articles that disclaimer I contributed to all those particles, so sorry for that. But the bottom picture is the life cycle of non-human accounts. So the top picture is the life cycle of human accounts, human identities, and the bottom one is the life cycle of non-human. And there's a fundamental difference between the two, where the top one is about humans getting a contract and based on the contract can work within a company. The underlying, the bottom picture is about non-humans, and these identities are created, and the creation process is not join and move a lever or .hr, it's a change management process. So the change management process, it can be a procurement process, it can be CI/CD pipeline, but at least there's a change. There's a regular change in RFC that initiates the creation process of the thing, And within that creation process, the thing gets a lot of requirements are embedded in the creation process. Like this thing must have an authorization, must have some access to a share of must whatever be connected to a physical device. That's then connect provision to get into production, and then it's get authenticated like what you started with, like keys or tokens or whatever secrets you can imagine. And then in the due course, it's been managed and maintained. For instance, we need to have it clustered or scaled or moved to another server. But that's the managed part. And then when the task is done, the thing is being decommissioned, deprovisioned. It will be removed, put in a trash can, whatever, and it's gone. So there's not the life cycle is run. Well, what life cycle was not a lot of cycling with it. It's just a process, but it's the life cycle is it starts within a change and it gets removed in a change. And for hiring is not a change; it's a business process for adding resources to the company, people working in. So there's a definite difference. And if you're looking at IGA, the one of the topics in the discussion today, IGA systems like SailPoint or Savient, Armada, One Identity, or the others, they are getting their changes from HR system. Yeah, like I mentioned them all. They get the
Rather
deltas.
quickly too.
The deltas are coming from HR process, HR system. So an HR system like Workday or SD Work, whatever they called, they are the managing process. And we from IGA, we just built on that existing process. We can be like we could say it. I'm trying to find a word. I'm not sure. We can use the data in that authoritative source, and in the underlying system, we got another process, change management process, and then the governing system would be a CMDB, configuration management database, or an API management system, or an API gateway, or a different component. So, and why should you add those things to IGA? IGA will, of course, in reconciliation, read all those existing non-human accounts. It will see it because they are an AD or an LDAP, but you will not manage those in IGA because IGA only knows about join and move a lever and role-based access control and business processes.
If I can make one observation about this diagram, which is that in your first box, create, I guess what I was getting at is that I really would hope the machine would register, would create a key pair and register instead of some top-down process where we're creating it. Um, now, in OAuth jargon, I think in this part of it, we should really think about issuing software statements, and I think that the best analogy here is really the UK open banking style federation, um, where there's some trusted like security council or software council that vets the software, issues them a software statement, and then allows them to create identities. Because I think that it's not that there's one machine identity, but there might be ephemeral instances, each with their own unique client credentials, so we can create a digital chain of custody down to this instance, not just this type of thing. Um, so yeah, so I kind of agree with this, but like you said, you're just thinking from a business level. But Sentil, maybe any thoughts about this? The sort of life
Sure.
cycle. What does this look like at Salesforce for
So
provisioning service?
for me, this diagram is perfect, except there is only one missing thing, which is a connection between the person and the machine. All the software or the hardware identities have to be
Mm-hmm.
connected with a human identity. That's the only missing link in this diagram, and that's where bigger enterprises are feeling a pain. Over the course of years, you create a lot of pseudo accounts, but the owner leaves, and then the accountability is a big problem, and current identity teams are struggling to identify a new owner and try to attach to them, and that's been a big problem, especially when you have the mover process where within the company a person leaves a team and moves to another team, and maybe end of the day they are leaving the company, right? So that is a huge problem I see from the enterprise, and that's where we need to have a better process of managing these orphan accounts. One of the pharma company I consulted, they had a better orphan management when when a particular person leaves the company, right away their machine identities will get shifted to one level up in the hierarchy to that particular manager. In that case, still that identities are owned by a human identity, and whenever a backfill comes to that, that particular role, the manager will assign back those identities, the machine accounts back to that person. Before that, they'll run a quick access review to make sure if they still need it, if they still need those, hardware accounts or software accounts, and then perform or provide those accounts back to them. So that's the problem I have seen, where companies are spending hours and hours trying to identify those with the manual resource, and the accountability process is lost.
I agree,
Yeah,
Sentinel.
yeah.
This
There's a lack
yeah.
of. It's like a whole new business process, or that you need to define
Yeah.
who controls these accounts. Actually, sorry, Andre, you had some thoughts
Yeah.
too.
No, no, no worry. Just add a thought. This is what Sid is describing is really an issue with most companies. But when we managed to do it for laptops, from not losing laptop, he's to return the laptop. We don't do that with other components, like owning own components, and that's why we need to have the change management process more in place. That lacks governance. So we have a device or a component, and no one is the owner, or IT is the owner. But cannot be the case. And so if we can just use the similarity to laptops, for instance, it's a silly example, I know, but if we can have, for instance, an RPA just like a laptop, someone is the owner of the RPA, someone is owner of the laptop or user of the RPA, user of the laptop. We know it because it's registered in the CMDB, and we're not used doing that for non-physical components. I hardly ever see a company register their software components in our CMDB or another repository. And as SBOM, software bill of materials, would be nice if we can have some kind of registry for software components or RPAs or other things, other devices, not just the procurement process where we know we bought 15 widgets. Now we have to know these 15 widgets are used or owned by someone. And if that's the case, then on join mover or lever, we know who's using those components, who's owning those components. So it's a lack of governance, like Sentinel just mentioned correctly. It's a lack of governance that we're not mature enough to manage who has access to what. And that's brings me to a second thought, of course. It's also in the article. If you're looking at things versus persons, a person has authorizations. A person can do things. A person can have access. And things the same. A thing has access. A thing can write a repository, can make a query in that database. A thing can move a robot arm, whatever. So that can be done. But there's one big difference. People manage things. So a thing is also a resource, a component that needs to be managed. So if you're looking at things or non-human identities, non-human accounts, these are both actors, how you say it, subjects and objects. So a thing is a subject to get access to other objects, but it's also object being managed by subjects like people to manage things. So reconfiguration of an RPA takes a person to do it. So we got in non-human accounts, we got two access points. One access from the things to resources, and the second one from subjects, users to things. So that's interesting view of access for non-human accounts.
And Andre, if I could leave you on the hot seat for a second, one of the challenges around, okay, so if it's a person, I know he has access to these applications, right? Or maybe these roles in these applications. But if we're talking about an application, it might have really vast access to customer data, and it might have lots and lots of like the complexity of reviewing access for something like an application almost means like, well, can you really, isn't it the application developers? I don't know, maybe you could just comment on that extra complexity there.
It's getting more complex as we speak, as you could say. We used to have role-based access control. So you got a role in an organization, based on that role, you get authorizations. So why do you get access? Who can have access to what and why? Now, because you got a role and someone gave you the role, you get authorizations. In the new world, like Central just explained, we try to get authorizations, access policies out of the application. And that means that if you're looking at the application, we don't know who can have access unless you look at the policy. And the policy doesn't state that I have access, but only that someone with my attributes may have access. Someone wearing glasses may have access. So you cannot say upfront who can have access, who has access. You can only say who may have access based on the policy. So that's a fundamental change in access control. From role-based access control, we know who has access based on the role system, which is, unless you get the nested groups of corporate, we know who has access. But in the modern world, we're looking at applications, we try to get authorizations out of the application, meaning we have to define policies that can be reused over applications. So we cannot say who has access to applications only based on what policy someone may have access to a application. That's a fundamental change in access control.
Senthil, maybe you could comment on on how these applications have more, like I was saying before, complexity. They might have more deep access to customer data. Any thoughts on how is that just that become more work for the developers, but the developers can't govern themselves, you know?
So that is one. This is one of the hot topic where we are trying to segregate the production data, which is your customer data, from the enterprise data, where you have employee access. And this holds good for every other application out there. That is the origin. Like whenever you create an application, you have to classify whether it's used by enterprise or by production, which is your customer base. And these two systems doesn't touch each other. So in that case, if one thing get compromised, it doesn't laterally move towards the other, and vice versa. So in even then, we are not allowing developers to have access to certain production system, and that's where your SOD kicks in and say, "Hey, okay, you're a developer, you have access to XYZ system in a certain environment, and you have operations team that require, their primary role is to work with the production data based on the requirements and need to day basis." So that's how we segregate. And also you have your other data classification and other tools that are running around these systems to make sure you don't have a kind of like a protected data or protected sensitive information that is lying around. And it's time to time those scanners are being run to make sure your data is cleansed, or if there is a violation, you are asked to clean that up right away quickly.
That still sounds like it's about the people, though. So that when you can't act, you're either acting on enterprise data or customer data. Um, what about, let's say, a piece of software that's running, that's generating reports, and so that's calling APIs, and so it has certain permissions. And what's the process for managing those types of applications? And even on the API side, is there a sort of similar review process there?
Usually, we follow the API contracts to see, who has access to this particular API and what are the permissions they have. Those are unfortunately the case where developers are the people who can modify those and add those as needed. I would like to see, more a business owner readable API contract where you don't know anything about this, but you see this is the API we are providing access to a financial information. You should have the checkbox to say financial access, need or read or write, exposable or not. Those kind of I haven't seen that API vendor yet. Maybe they exist, but I'm not aware of that. It's still the developer trying to manage some of these API access.
Right. It's interesting. So, uh, uh, Andre, shouldn't an API gateway sort of consume the same policies that we would ask an application to? And so, shouldn't all the API vendors just be saying, "Well, we're going to support"? I guess from their perspective, they'd like to support just authn. Um, but what about the business process? Is there a difference between API access control and other types of access control?
Definitely, definitely. For instance, one of the big issues we just discussed about is getting access to applications. At this moment, we still build applications with a lot of security in the application, in the API. So the API still queries the role tables or authorization tables in the application. And if we move ahead to in the near future, we must take out all this authorization information from the application because that makes it scalable. If we keep all the legacy stuff behind APIs, we still got a lot of legacy stuff, a lot of
Yeah.
platform information behind the APIs. And you can open up the API, but there's only a limited number of controls that you can attributes that you can provide to the application because every application is unique. So if you want to have more scalable and more sustainable application development, we have to take out all authorization stuff, all security stuff, and have the business applications, business functionality in the application behind the API, behind the endpoint. And if you look at the API gateway, of course, needs to know where the API lives, where it is, where it lives, what network, what network domain, and but it also needs the orchestration of let's first verify the identity. Okay, I know the identity from a reliable identity provider. Is the level of authentication enough? LOA? Is it multi-factor authentication? Or does it comply with the coarse-grained access control rules? And then next phase in orchestration, I can imagine stepping out to a policy engine like Plain ID or Open Policy Agent to do more fine-grained access. And if you comply with the policy, then you get access to the API. And in my vision, if you can see the API, you're free to use it. If you can see the API, it's yours. So we have to prevent people seeing APIs that they shouldn't see. So that's the whole new way of looking at the new modern way of policy management or access control, getting authorizations out of the applications, externalizing authorization management, and making it possible that we can reuse authorization policies. But that's also takes governance, it takes ownership of policies, takes ownership of authorizations, and that's the biggest fight in access control.
So I wanted to go to last thoughts. Maybe Sentil, I'll let you have first last thoughts on
Sure, I would.
authorization, IGA.
As I see more and more vendors are coming up with a lot of the, policies and terminologies, like Andrew was mentioning about Plain ID. I've seen the product, and it was more helping around business users, to easily read a policy and enhance that and provide access needed. But also, it should be more aligned with your security policies you have built for this. So, as we get into the more authorization chapters in the upcoming months and years, I would like to see more improvements to provide more fine-grained authorization policies. That's my hope. Yeah.
And Andre, I mean, I feel like we just barely scratched the surface, but any last thoughts?
Well, we scratched the surface indeed, and there's so much more to be discussed. But I'm glad that in these days, it looks like we got the basic protocols in place to at least make it possible to migrate away, to move further. Um, as I said, we tried, every customer tried to make them understand we have to move from platforms to protocols because protocols are sustainable and scalable and make it scalable. And so that's the only way to move ahead. So we're not there yet. We have to change a lot of old ways of thinking, get more awareness about where to go to, and that at least now it's possible. We got the technology, so at least we have the possibility to move ahead. We just have to get the people out of the old ways of thinking. That's what you need to do.
Okay, well, thank you guys for joining. I just want to make a quick announcement about next week's episode is Consent is Dead. How bad is it really? With XML Girl and Identity Monk. Should be a good episode. And if you could follow us on LinkedIn, that would be great. We're trying to get to 1,000 followers. And I guess with that, wrap it up. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Sentil, for joining us.
Thank you
Thank
for